Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me here on Wave Now. I'm Myra and sorry. If you have kids, if you have grandkids, any children in your life, I really want you to stop and watch this stream because this is so important. This article that I read just caught my attention. It was in The Lancet. It said a new study, 1 in 12 children, they are victims of online sexual abuse. So that's what we're talking about today. So joining me right now is Dr. Melissa Curry. She is Norton Children's child abuse pediatrician and the medical director of Norton Children's Pediatric Protection Specialist. Dr. Curry, thank you so much for talking with us today. I think this is something a lot of folks with children in our lives, and we know they spend a lot of time online. So much for us to gain from this conversation. Did this study surprise you? 1 in 12 children are victims of online sexual abuse.
No, to be honest, it didn't. And that in and of itself is kind of sad. And thank you for having me today. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity for us to address this issue. Sexual abuse of children is incredibly widespread. Some of the statistics that we rely on tell us that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men were victims of some form of sexual abuse as children. So given the explosion of the technology and the online social media presence that children have these days through their devices, 1 in 12, I'm afraid it doesn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm. How can a child, be sexually abused online? What does that look like?
So there are a variety of ways that can happen. The first is that folks, and these can be peers or adults, can develop relationships with children through the online platforms and can then arrange times and places for them to meet up in person, in which, in-person physical contact occurs. But there are other ways that sexual abuse can happen without in-person contact, and that can be in the form of soliciting children to send photos or videos of themselves or others. It can be in the form of a child having photos or videos taken of them unbeknownst to them, and then having those posted online. There also is the concept of deep fakes. So those are images of other people where the child's face is superimposed onto the photograph and it looks quite real. And so it is essentially implying that that's a picture of the child. It's really, the exploitation point, part of it is really any time that something of value is exchanged for the child's cooperation by sending photos, videos, statements, access, live conversations, those kinds of things. So it doesn't just have to be money. It can be food, or it can be just, personal attention that makes the child feel flattered that an older peer or an adult is interested in them.
I want to talk a little bit about this study. For those that are joining us here online, I've put a link to this study from the journal, The Lancet Child and Adolescent Health, and it looked at data from 123 studies between 2010 and 2023. So researchers they analyzed the number of children younger than 18 years old who were exposed to any of the subtypes of sexual abuse online. So that's, as we mentioned, solicitation, online sexual exploitation, sexual extortion, and non-consensual taking and sharing of and exposure to sexual images and videos, just as Dr. Curry mentioned. So if you want to read more about this study, just click on this link. Also, I want to throw out there, if you have questions for Dr. Curry related to this topic, put them here in the chat and I will try to get them over to her as soon as I notice them. So Dr. Curry, what do we do? Like as parents, we want to make sure our kids are safe. I just got a phone for my 11-year-old son, and I'm going to admit that I'm terrified, but letting him have that access right in his hands. But what can we do as parents?
I think the first thing we do is educate ourselves. We need to understand what applications our children want to have on their phones and make sure that we are approving each and every one. educate ourselves about what parental controls are available for the specific phone that you've gotten for your child, or any other device like a tablet for that matter. Honestly, I think the first step is being scared. I think we need to have a healthy dose of fear because it is the Wild West out there. As I saw in another article, a colleague said that the internet has become a crime scene for children. And sadly, that's true. So educating ourselves and then educating our children. We have to have honest, open conversations about these things. And yes, for many of us, those are uncomfortable conversations to have. But if we're going to help keep our kids safe, we have to educate them and arm them with the knowledge about the different ways they can be taken advantage of. I think that one of the things we fail to recognize when it comes to children being exploited or abused online is that much like with human trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation of children, victims don't realize they're victims. They feel that they are getting special attention by someone that they are flattered who is, paying attention to them. They may be, getting a psychological need fulfilled. They may be getting gifts, other things, and they may view this as a relationship with this individual rather than themselves being victims. So helping our kids understand how they can be victimized. And that's tough because we don't want to scare them, right? We want to educate them without alarming them. And, I think that we need more and more research into this topic so that we can understand what the effective ways are to communicate with our kids. First and foremost is open and honest communication.
I'm going to try to phrase this question as best as I can. But with online sexual abuse, the signs of it, can it look different than a child experiencing sexual abuse, with an encounter, if that makes any sense? I don't know if I'm saying that correctly.
Sure, I understand your question. Yes, I think that it can look different and it can look quite vague, unfortunately. Signs that our kids are being stressed can be fairly nonspecific, things like a drop in grades or moodiness or mood changes, sleep changes, appetite changes. All of these can be evidence of, mental health issues, of other sources of stress in a child's life. But certainly, online sexual abuse and exploitation will have those same effects. We're not expecting to see the physical signs and symptoms that we typically would see, or not typically, that we can sometimes see with physical sexual abuse. However, you can see those signs of stress. We also can see an uptick in the amount of time the child is spending online or on their phone. You may notice that they're being more secretive. I always recommend that parents have an agreement up front with their children about what they are allowed to do on their phone, and that the parent always has the ability at any time to take the phone and look through it. I think that we shouldn't surprise our children with that, in that we should tell them beforehand that if the part of the privilege of having the phone is allowing parents to look at the content. And so they should monitor their content accordingly. I think that that's a really smart thing to do. And that way, when we take the phone, if we see that apps have been downloaded that weren't approved or other things like that, that can help tip us off.
I'm glad you said that, Dr. Curry, because that's the boat I'm in right now, particularly with a young child who just got a phone, learning all the parental resources that are out there to safeguard your child, having that conversation with my son, saying, look, this is a phone, having it, but I'm going to get in there whenever I want and take a look at things. And it's they get annoyed, but we have to do that.
Absolutely, we have to do that. And I think that, we want to respect our children's privacy. And we can do that by having them have friends over and, go into another room and have a conversation that we're not going to listen in on. But I don't think that we need to necessarily feel obligated to afford our children that same privacy when it comes to online, because the risks are so much higher. You know, when it's an in-person contact, we know who they're having contact with. We know it's a same age peer. We know it's an appropriate person. But, you know, out in the wild west of the internet, we don't know who they're coming in contact with. And so, you know, giving them any sense that that is going to be private communication, I think would be, you know, the wrong direction for us to go as parents. I also recommend contracts. You know, if we have children who are old enough to read and write, you know, and hopefully we're not giving them access right to the internet if they aren't yet at that stage. But, you know, guidelines about what they can and can't post, about how they need to set their privacy settings. You know, I remember when my kids were younger and first getting devices, you know, we talked about things like beach photos and who those could be posted to and shared with and things like that.
That's a really good point, Dr. Curry. As someone in this field, how do you, you know, with online things evolving so much, I'm sure, you know, 20 years ago, we didn't think about online child sexual abuse. It wasn't really probably a thing 20, 30 years ago. But keeping up with this ever evolving world and knowing like, all right, I got to be careful of apps, sharing photos instantly, you know, just all of that. How do you stay on top of it?
Gosh, you know, I wish I had the silver bullet answer for you. You know, I think that we have to make it a priority. We need to recognize that it's part of our responsibility as parents or caregivers of children to help keep them safe in all of the milieus they're spending time. And online is one of those milieus, you know, just as much as a physical environment. And you know, I kind of liken it to things like keeping, you know, medications locked up in a lockbox, or guns stored separately from ammunition and locked up if they're going to be guns in the home and things like that. You know, we need to have that same degree of vigilance when monitoring our kids' online presence.
Obviously, being protective of patient privacy and everything, but any cases that you have worked or dealt with, if you feel comfortable sharing, just letting folks know like these things can happen and they do happen to people here in our area. Anything that comes to your mind?
Oh, sure. I mean, we've worked with children, and I've become aware through other channels of children who, you know, have been exploited by family members, by coaches, friends, other adults that, and when I say friends, I mean family friends who are adults, folks who are trusted by the child's parents. You know, most sexual abuse is perpetrated by someone known and trusted by the child and or their caregivers. Now, I don't know that we have the clear data yet about the online sexual abuse and exploitation to know if those statistics still hold. But, you know, I think it's helpful to recognize that. There was one other thing I was going to say, and I lost my train of thought. Remind me what you just asked.
No, it's okay. I kind of made it a little hard of a question. Any cases or alarming things that you've seen here in our area that have happened, you know, where people think, well, that doesn't happen here. Well, yes, unfortunately it does. And it has.
Yes, it absolutely has. You know, we have, you know, professionals in both public and private schools that have been known to sexually exploit children online. And it can be through creation of deep fake photos where they're, you know, posting, you know, pasting yearbook photos of the children onto other people's bodies, but also things like just developing online relationships with children that would certainly not be appropriate in person and are therefore not appropriate online either. And understanding that the online exploitation or the online, solicitation of children, so folks reaching out and developing relationships with our children, can lead to in-person trafficking. You know, I think what we used to call human trafficking in children, child prostitution or teenage prostitution. And now we know that that's not an appropriate phrase for it because that implies that they have some ability to consent to what they're doing. And in Kentucky, if you're younger than 16, you can't consent to sexual contact. And so even if you think you are consenting and you're 12 years old and you think that you're sending a photo to someone willingly, because you're under 16, you legally cannot consent to that. So, kids often don't realize they are being victimized. They think that this is a boyfriend or girlfriend that they are developing a relationship with rather than understanding this is actually their trafficker.
And say if an image goes out there online, Dr. Curry, I mean, once it's online, it's out there, it's been shared. There's no, bringing it back in.
Yeah. There are things that law enforcement can do to help attempt to scrub those images. I do acknowledge that I think that, largely once it's out there, it's out there. And that's one of the most unfortunate things about this particular form of abuse and exploitation is that the child is re-victimized every time that image is viewed. I definitely encourage parents and caregivers of children to contact law enforcement immediately if they become aware of any form of sexual abuse or exploitation online. Law enforcement can be helpful, not just in educating the family about what resources are available and what recourse they may have from a legal perspective, but also in helping, try to scrub those images as well as we can from the internet. I will also say that's another thing for us to be honest with our kids about and open with our kids about, that if they choose, for example, to not follow the advice that we're giving them and to do something we've explicitly told them not to do online, and they find that they are now being victimized, it needs to be an open door policy that they can come tell you immediately and that you will be supportive and that they will not be in trouble and that you will help them, try to solve this problem and that you'll be there for them. I think fear of consequences and punishment by parents and caregivers sometimes keeps kids, from sharing what has happened. They're embarrassed. They may have shame. They may, feel terrible for, breaking a rule, and now they've found themselves in the situation. So to the degree that we can be open and available to them and have those conversations frequently and beforehand is, I think, helpful.
I'm so glad you said that. That was a good reminder for us as parents. And, just a thought that I had, if you're joining us right now, you're a parent, and this is hitting home to you. Sit down with your kids later today and have them watch this stream so they can understand it, hear it from firsthand from a professional about everybody that's out there on the internet is not necessarily a good person. They may have bad intentions. And we as parents, we're just doing everything that we can to protect you. Dr. Curry, can you tell folks one more time, just some of the things that parents should look out for behavioral wise, that something's not right. Maybe I need to start doing a little digging with what they're doing online.
I think, anything that's a sign of stress in children, and it can be non-specific. It's not necessarily going to be an indicator that this is the specific issue going on, but things like, school performance dropping, becoming withdrawn, having changes in behavior or mood, problems with appetite or sleep, I'm trying to think what else. I think, spending more time on the phone, becoming more secretive, becoming less forthcoming during dinner conversations, things like that. But I do think that one big take-home message here is we don't want to wait for those signs. We want to be monitoring and taking our kids' phones and going through everything on some sort of regular basis. And they know that that's going to happen from the get-go.
Okay. Dr. Curry, is there anything that I'm not asking you that you feel like our viewers today should know about?
I think just simply the concept of how profoundly prevalent this is. Last year there were 36 million reports of suspected child sexual exploitation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and Homeland Security Investigations. And we know that this is grossly underreported. We know that, children, because of the shame involved, will not report to their caregivers, and oftentimes families will choose not to report to authorities. And again, I think supervision of online time, I think limiting screen time and encouraging in-person actual connection, human to human connections in our children's lives is really important. I think that's about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think a lot of parents, we can relate to this. We didn't grow up with this technology in our hands as children. So our kids are navigating a whole new world without knowing the dangers of what's out there. And we don't know it because we never went through it to some extent, So everybody is in a learning process with this, but it's wonderful that there are resources out there. It's important we have these conversations. In this link as well, I've posted a link to preventing child abuse in Kentucky. There's resources here, support, training, data, and info that you can look up as well. Dr. Curry, thank you so much for your help on this topic. For a parent that's navigating all of this, I can tell you that it was helpful for myself, a lot of good reminders, and reminding our kids that they can come and talk to us if something bad has happened is always important. Dr. Curry, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
All right. Take care. All right. I'm Myra Ansari. I hope you have a wonderful day. Please share this link with your children. Have them look at it. It's an important conversation that we need to have. Have a great day.